Thank you, Bob. I just told Linwood, I said that's the best introduction I've ever had. Not only that, it's the second opportunity he's had to introduce me at a similar event, and it's the second time he hasn't done so. I think there's a message in there. In any event, I would like to announce that I am Governor number 2 for tonight. You've only got 7 more to go. In case you didn't happen to read the fine print in your program. Thank you for coming anyway, and for not leaving once you'd finished your dessert. As you've probably heard, the media, or some of the media, at least up in the Washington area, are referring today as the end of an era. It was Shuttle Discovery's last flight. It was visible in all of the Washington area. People in any of the buildings apparently got a very good close-up look of the Shuttle Discovery on the back of the 747 that was carrying it. And Lynn and I weren't able to see it. We went to a funeral in Winchester, and we heard about the plane getting ready to take off, and we were coming back about the time the flight was taking place. But it was an end of an era in another way that I just mentioned in passing that many of you are probably not aware of. We'd gone to Winchester to attend the funeral of Marguerite Smith. And many of you knew, many of you here tonight knew Marguerite and certainly knew her late husband, Al Smith. And if anyone could be described as part of an era, I think most of you would probably have to agree that Al fell into that category. He didn't have a whole lot of formal education, but Al was as wise as just about anybody I ever met about how Virginia government, and he always had an interesting way of saying it, operated. And Linda and I were very pleased to be able to pay our respect to the end of that era today as well. I was intrigued by a sentence in our instructions on getting here from Bob Gibson, who wasn't planning on introducing me, as you could probably tell. In fact, he almost introduced Jerry Beliles, and I will remember Jerry. I'll get you. But I'd like to read just one sentence from the instructions that he sent to all of the governors and former governors. And it quoted, each governor is asked to bring no more than 4 aides, bodyguards, or security personnel, unless he is a sitting governor, in which case 5 are permitted. Now, Lynn, my question to you is what does he think we are doing now? Or what are the others doing that we haven't heard about? Anyway, it's nice to have a chance to be together with all of those who've had the privilege of serving in this office, especially when it's not at a funeral. Well, my topic tonight is education. And I'd like to begin by saying that Lynn's decision to personally escort his daughter, Kayla, to the majority-black John F. Kennedy High School here in Richmond on August 31st, 1970, and I agree completely with my mentor, Colgate Darden, did more to advance the cause of civil rights than any single act in my lifetime. And that photo that was on the front page of all of Virginia's newspapers and many of the national newspapers, including the New York Times, did more to advance the cause of equality in public education, a topic that I've been asked to talk about, than any other photo in my lifetime. It proved the old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I'm not just saying that 42 years later. I was saying that when I was a Democratic candidate for governor, and Lynn Holton was still a practicing Republican. Well, why have I always put so much emphasis on education? Because I've always thought of education as the great equalizer, and it's an area where government can really make a difference. Now, Virginia has long had a reputation for some of its top colleges and universities around the country. But in the K through 12 area, we had some challenges. I started out when I was lieutenant governor by organizing and then chairing the Virginia Forum on Education, where we pulled together some of the top education leaders in the Commonwealth, including teachers, superintendents, and college presidents. I got to know who the innovators were and what was working and what wasn't working. And we focused on getting good teachers because we can all remember teachers who inspired us, and we can remember some who didn't. And if we wanted to get more of the former, we were going to have to compete with other professions like doctors and lawyers and engineers and business executives, all fields that were rapidly coming up and opening up to women at that particular point in our history. The best and the brightest now had more choices. Now, admittedly, not many teachers have ever gone into teaching to get rich, but they've got families to feed, and they want to be respected, and that was an area where we could have an impact. When I was putting together my cabinet, I had just about decided on a Secretary of Education, who happened to be a highly respected college president here in Virginia, and I got a call from Edgar Shannon, then president of the University of Virginia, who was one of the people that I had asked to help me make suggestions and to vet, if you will, some of the people that might serve in a cabinet. And Edgar began by asking if I'd made a decision on the Secretary of Education. I told him I was leaning at that point. I didn't say who I was leaning toward, but I hadn't made a decision. He said, please don't make a final decision until you've talked to John Castine, who was then director of admissions at the University of Virginia. And I agreed. I met with John for well over an hour and offered him a job. And he had a whole lot of really innovative ideas that appealed immediately to me. And by the time we had finished our conversation, he'd agreed, and he said he'd take the challenge. And for State Superintendent of Public Instruction, I asked Dr. John Davis, whom I'd gotten to know when he was Superintendent of Education for Fairfax County, and I had recommended him in 1979 to Governor Dalton for the position of State Superintendent of Public Education, and he had accepted that recommendation, and I had the privilege of reappointing him, and he did such a good job that Jerry Beliles asked him to serve for 4 more years. Jack Davis was a highly respected and universally liked and had a passion for improving educational opportunities for every child in Virginia, no matter what their circumstances. He was totally committed, and he was really an inspiration to work with. One of the goals at the top of our agenda was to make meaningful increases in teacher salaries. At that point, average teacher salaries in Virginia were scheduled or would have been 41st in the nation unless something fairly dramatic was done. So we developed a state budgeting technique that I called level funding, where I challenged all state agency heads to provide at least the same level of service in the next 2 years as they had in the last 2 years, without any increase in state funding for that period. And we actually entered into a contract. And in almost all cases, a couple of agencies did need a little more to do everything that they needed to be done. But what we did is took all of that inflation-adjusted difference, and inflation was a good deal more than it is today, and we brought that into the educational establishment for our teacher salaries. And for the first time ever, as far as I know, we were up to the national median and the highest in the South. We went ahead and took one of the recommendations from the Governor's Commission on Science and Technology and created the Center for Innovative Technology that many of you have seen, that kind of funny-shaped building up just by Dulles. We saw it today on our way back from Winchester. You may remember the little fight that we had. Hunter Andrews was leading the proponents and Buzz Emick was on the other side, and that it took a while before we finally got it. But it's there, and it's proven itself. We partnered with CBAF, the Continuous Electron Beam Accelerator Facility, located in Newport News, and they needed to have a world-class leader. And so Linda and I hosted a dinner in the Governor's Mansion for Dr. Herman Grunder and most of the high technology leaders and business leaders in the Commonwealth at that time to see if we could persuade him, and we were fortunate enough to do so. And that facility today is known as the Thomas Jefferson Federal Lab. We created several governor's schools, particularly for science and technology, including the nation's top high-tech school in the country. It's top ranked. Some of you saw the Washingtonian article saying America's best high school. I was pleased to be invited to the 25th anniversary of the formal founding of that school and to deliver a keynote. And we created other governor's schools, including one in Tidewater for the performing arts. And for those of you who have heard the strolling strings that play at state dinners and other major functions, this group put on a performance that was every bit the equal of the strolling strings that play at the White House. We put together the Verina project for distant learning, and we established statewide standards for student test scores the first time that had been done. And the test scores began to improve, so we could see that there was a direct relationship. I gained a certain amount of credibility on the subject when all of our daughters agreed to attend public schools here in Richmond City, although the late Richmond News leader ran 3 full-page editorials in a row criticizing that decision. Oh, how I miss Ross McKenzie. Now, we didn't need to do anything as dramatic as Linwood and Jinx did. Jinx actually took Taylor, who became a judge and the First Lady of the Commonwealth. We just kissed our 3 daughters goodbye as they left the executive mansion. But we later found out that the press followed them into their classrooms, and you can imagine how 3 young ladies would feel having the press stepping over all of the students at a time they're trying to get welcomed into a whole new environment. But they got good educations. They all went to top colleges, and they've all done very well. And while our 2 older girls later got involved professionally in pursuits involving education, our youngest daughter actually became a classroom teacher, something that I had long been seeking. A tremendous pride in her. For the last 12 years, she has taught math and been a winning coach for most of her years, one year undefeated, a couple of years not quite so good, but thoroughly enjoyed it, and we're very proud of her for doing it. Well, I could go on talking about some of the challenges and rewards of working on education, and every governor that's here tonight could do the same, and I realize that. But it's time to hear from our next governor, my friend Jerry Beliles. Now, Jerry didn't just parachute in, as Henry Howell once suggested that I had by starting out with lieutenant governor. Jerry built a record in the House of Delegates and then as Attorney General that made him a lock for governor. And with his record since leaving office, which was very much on a parallel with what he did while he was in office, and most recently as director of the highly acclaimed Miller Center at Virginia, he continues to demonstrate the qualities that all of us were proud to have him as our governor. It's my pleasure to introduce our Commonwealth's 65th governor, the Honorable Jerry Beliles.